So step one of your analysis needs to be audience and purpose. Who are they? And how might it affect content? You also need to think about context, and that's closely related to purpose and includes the formality of the situation. But it's basically the social situation in which language is used. This situation has an important influence on the language choices made by speakers and writers. Okay, so step two, we're going to start getting a little bit more technical, and you should try and look at the following things in your step two of your analysis. The first one is adjacency. So this is a pattern of speech in which one utterance is followed by an appropriate linked response. So typical examples are a question followed by an answer, a greeting followed by an appropriate response, and a statement followed by a statement of agreement or disagreement. So it's basically a kind of an accompaniment, a pair of utterances that really match together. Okay, you should also look at that's basically just a series of adjacency pairs to build up a conversation gradually. But it'd be like the start of a conversation, or as the conversation progresses, particularly if it's an interview, you'll have question-answer format throughout. So you could talk about that as the chaining of those responses. Okay. Also within step two, you need to be looking at how the speakers are interacting with one another. It could be that this obviously relates to context and the situation they're in, but an interruption is when a speaker begins to talk before the previous speaker has finished, and it's always an attempt to take over the conversation, gain control in some way, so it's a quite aggressive move. This compares quite nicely with an overlap. But it has a little bit of a different motivation behind it. So an overlap is when a speaker begins to talk before the previous speaker is finished, but perhaps because of their enthusiasm to join in the discussion or to show support for the speaker. You probably find yourselves doing this quite a lot, so if someone's talking about something you know or have knowledge about, it's likely that you'll jump in and provide your own example or your own response in agreement, and just, yeah, it's slightly more cooperative and supportive than an interruption. Turn is kind of self-explanatory really, but it's the cooperation or competition between listeners and speakers. Within turn-taking, you need to consider who dominates that turn-taking. If you've got a conversation between 3 or 4 people, there'll always be 1 or 2 who dominate that. So think about how the speakers take turns, whether it is one by one in the same route around the circle, or whether there are certain ones who dominate. Is there a pattern to the way they're speaking to one another and taking turns? Yeah, think about how speakers are prevented from taking a turn as well. It could be that they just talk louder or more quickly to avoid being interrupted or overlapped. How do they indicate that they've finished speaking and that it is someone else's turn to speak? There might be a gesture of the hand, some kind of nod, there might be a certain word that's said at the end, perhaps maybe a question is asked at the end of their speech in order to engage someone else and state that their turn's finished. So there's quite a lot to turn taking and just analysing it and deciding how it works. Obviously it's much easier if you've only got a discussion between 2 people. It becomes a lot harder if you've got a discussion between a larger group of people. 2, you also look at repairs. So this is a self-correction in spontaneous speech. So it might be one of these 3 situations. So it might be that you pick up signals from your audience that what you're saying is too difficult for them to understand or too boring, and so you change or shorten what you're saying. You might realise that what you're about to say may cause offence to your particular audience, and so you adapt or amend your language accordingly. Or you may suddenly think of a better or more interesting way to express yourself, and so go back and cross out what you've started to say effectively. This can happen in a really short way or a longer way. The short way would be kind of starting off a sentence and just stopping partway through that to adjust the sentence that you're giving. Or it might be that you do say that full sentence and then go back and say it again in a different way. So look at how these repairs are occurring, and again relate back to the audience and context of the. Okay, so Step 2 is quite a large section, sequences in there. So this is a sequence of utterances inserted into a conversation which causes the main topic to be temporarily suspended. This happens all the time, so it's basically you've just had a change of direction or a diversion away from the topic, and you start talking about something related, although kind of slightly off topic. This happens quite a lot. You'll probably see it happen in lessons sometimes, that people will divert from the topic or subject in hand, but it's temporary. At some point you'll look at how that's brought round to the conversation that actually needs to be taking place, and how the turn takers really have adjusted that conversation accordingly. Okay, so that was all of step 2. It's more just about the dynamics of the speech and the structure of it and how it's all put together. So step 3, slightly different. We're going to get even more technical here. So the utterance. An utterance is just something someone says. It's a phrase, a sentence. It's just, instead of saying this person said such and such, you could use utterance as a terminology. But emphatic utterance is to establish social contact and express friendly intentions towards another person, rather than to convey anything significant. So, nice day today. Any comment on the weather, what they're doing, how they are, is just really just social contact. It's not to drive the conversation forward or anything along those lines. Again, if you spot these, just relate those back to context. It might be that it's friends meeting up after a while. It might be that these emphatic utterances are more formal or informal depending on the audience. So always... Okay, next one we're going to have monosyllabic and polysyllabic words. Fairly straightforward. Monosyllabic, syllable, polysyllabic, words with more than one. Okay. In terms of how you comment on these, it obviously just shows how the person is taking to the conversation and how comfortable they are, or maybe how formal the situation is. The more formal it is, the more polysyllabic words there are going to be. The less formal, the more monosyllabic words there will be. It might show that the speaker is quite uncomfortable if they're using monosyllabic words. If you think, you reply with no or yes all the time, you probably don't want to be in that situation or that conversation. So just observe how many of each are used, relate them back to informal and formal, and then just relate them back to context, so why they might be feeling more comfortable to use polysyllabic words in those instances. Okay, also within this section you're going to look at dialect, because it's to do with the kinds of words they use. So dialect is related to where a person is from, but it's the grammar or vocabulary relating to that. So the example on this picture is obviously the different ways of kind of saying you and referring to that. You've also got different words relating to a particular area of the country, of the UK. Just see if you can decide where that dialect is from. You've got chunter, cla, cles, clag, clagum, claggy, or clamming. Yeah, you might have heard of those before. See if you can work out what dialect they are. Okay, so dialect is a variety of a particular language characterised by distinctive features of accent, grammar and vocabulary. So it's all of those things coming together, but it's a lot to do with grammar. So if they maybe say, we was going town, yeah, we was, should have been we were. That's quite a common example. So it's any of the grammar things, but also the vocabulary that you saw on the last slide, particular words that would be a feature of that region. It's all to do with dialect. We're going to come on to accent later on. Okay, you've got a hedge. So this is a word or phrase such as maybe, perhaps, or sort of, used to soften the impact of what's said or to make a speech sound more polite. Again, relate this back to context, why they feel they might have to do that in that situation. It might be that it's a more formal situation, probably more uncomfortable. They may be approaching an issue that they don't feel comfortable with. Okay, so they're just softening the blow of, it could be that they're saying something slightly offensive. Okay, so step 3, as you could probably see, was all related to vocabulary and the kinds of words being used. Step 4 is slightly different again. The first thing that you're going to look at with step 4 is Okay, so this is the characteristic pronunciation features and speech rhythms of a speaker, usually related to regional or social influences. So the difference between accent and dialect is that dialect is related to grammar and vocabulary on the whole, whereas accent is related to how those words are said. Okay, I think we've looked at these examples before, but bath, bath, grass. You've got that A sound sounds slightly different from one place of the country to another. You've got many other examples, often to do with vowel sounds though, whether they will be shorter or longer in particular areas of the country. Okay, so that's accent. It's all about the way their words sound. Okay, really this might only be significant if you're looking at a conversation between two speakers that are from two very different parts of the country, and there are really obvious differences between the way they're speaking, and it's actually affecting their conversation and their ability to communicate with one another, because maybe they're pronouncing words so differently that they're actually finding it difficult to understand what the other is saying. Okay, also within step 4 so this is the running together of words or the omission of parts of words. So gonna for going to, or you know for you know. Again, this is related to accent because it's the way things are said. These are two really common examples. There might be other less common ones depending on the accent of the person. But it's just when two words are kind of mashed together or run together. Okay, you've also got step 4. So ellipsis is two things. One of them we've seen before, so it's the dot, 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 showing there's a missing part of the sentence, or they've maybe left it on a cliffhanger, or it shows some thinking time. Often in conversations it's related to thinking time or dramatic pauses, so just think about which one applies in the situation that you've spotted it. It can also refer to the omission of part of a sentence, so you won't have the dot dot dot, but you can still state it as ellipsis. So hope you get well soon is an example as the personal pronoun I has been left out. It will often be personal pronouns that are left out. If you've been having a less formal conversation with someone for quite a while, then know that you mean yourself rather than someone else entirely. So I hope you get well soon. The I isn't necessary in the situation, so it's just been missed out. This type of ellipsis will often occur in much less formal conversations or discussions. Okay, so now we're on to step 5. As you could probably notice, step 4 was to do with the sounds of things and the words being said, kind of just how they sounded or how they were put together. Okay, so step 5 is something else again. We've got fillers here. I use these all the time. You'll probably notice them throughout the rest of the presentation now, but it's saying and It means that you're fluent. So if you spot them, they're used to fill pauses in speech. They may well use expressions such as you know or like as verbal fillers. Where you spot these, just have a think about why the person might be using them. The context of this speech is that I should have written a script and I haven't. So a lot of the time I'm using to fill the gaps as I just try and think of what my next piece will be. And I know I'm under a little bit of a time limit, so the are quite frequent. It might show nervousness in a different situation. Occasionally they'll be actually used on purpose to just kind of leave their audience with a bit of thinking time to have a think about what they've just said. Very occasionally they'll be used for that reason. Okay, we've then got the different types of pauses. So fillers will be used to actually fill the pause. A micro is a pause in the spoken text. Pause is going to be slightly longer, probably recorded in seconds. Okay, so pauses and micro pauses will just be a gap in the conversation. There'll be silence at that point, whereas a filler is used to fill that pause. So it's likely that a filler is used because someone's nervous and they're not comfortable with having that silence there. Okay, so have a think about the context again, why they might have paused there, why they didn't fill it with a filler. It might be that throughout the conversation there are no fillers, so it's unlikely maybe that that person uses fillers. It might just be that they prefer to pause, but it could be connected to the audience and the context that they're pausing instead of filling. Okay. Step 5 is all about the paralinguistic features. It's those non-verbal aspects of communication. So it's the intonation, pausing we've looked at. It helps the speaker to convey meaning effectively. So intonation or stress or emphasis on particular words. It will just be where the speaker maybe says that word louder, stronger. They might pause after it. if you rewind what I just said, a lot of the aspects I was saying during that bit of speech I emphasised because I wanted you to notice them. I think I just did it again with emphasised and noticed them. So it's just getting across those important bits of someone's speech. They will intonate that or stress it in some way to help you notice it.